so important. I'm going to talk about two research projects. They are linked, but they're quite different, and I'm going to begin by comparing them. I'm going to talk a little bit about the rationale for the studies, the methodology, flag some of the findings and the implications, and then, as I say, hopefully open to some discussion that this opportunity presents to us, some questions and some discussions. We know there are gaps in teacher knowledge and teacher expertise, inconsistencies in individual education plannings, and aspects such as this present real challenges to inclusive education. In the Irish context, a large-scale study relating to initial teacher education for inclusion identified lots of aspects of concern, but absolutely a need to embed inclusive pedagogy across the ITE curriculum, the initial teacher education curriculum, so that it's important that this aspect is not seen as standalone, as individual modules, but absolutely embedded within the curriculum. And that presents lots of challenges, certainly in Ireland, and I'd be interested in hearing what your experience is like. They highlighted also a need to develop student-teacher skills for inclusive practices in initial teacher education, and crucially, for better alignment of the school placement experiences with programs. So rather than having a divide between the time that our student teachers spend in schools on what is called placement in the Irish context, and their higher education-based component of their program, that we need to build those kind of links. The more I work in this field, the more convinced I become of the truth of this statement, that student teachers can't learn everything they will need or will need to know about inclusion and inclusive education during the pre-service stage. You know, that this stage, initial teacher education, is about laying foundations, and I would argue about building capacity, winning hearts and minds of our student teachers. We can build strong foundations of knowledge for the student teacher at the beginning of their professional career. And I think we must, as I say, win their hearts and win their minds, and perhaps counter some of the preconceptions, the assumptions, the deficit kind of perspectives that they might bring with them, perhaps, into their initial teacher education program. A little bit about me and my context. I won't dwell on this too much because Rajesh has already told you probably a lot more than you need to know about me. But Ireland, for those of you who don't know, kind of in the middle of that, Western Europe, on the fringes of Western Europe. Dublin is located on the east coast of Ireland, and when you think of Ireland, you might be thinking of images like the one I've just put on the screen, and certainly a lot of Ireland is very rural, very green, lots of dispersed communities, which brings its own implications for inclusive education. Some of you might be thinking of, I'm from Dublin. I work in Dublin City University, and you might think of a very famous logo there of Guinness in Dublin. And this image here is a picture of the campus on which I work and where I'm sitting at the moment in my office. This is our newest building on our campus here. So that's just a little bit about my context. My teaching and learning research roles, Rajesh has already talked through those, but just putting them on the screen, not because I want to emphasize them, but because some of you may be wondering about the relevance of some of the research that I've been doing. But I have had a very eclectic career thus far in higher education, came into it focused very much on classroom practice. And I suppose because of those kind of roles I've taken in terms of teaching and learning, my interest has moved not entirely away from classroom practices, but very much focusing on the slightly different classroom, if you like. So focusing on teacher education for inclusion, and then more recently focusing on higher education practice for inclusion more broadly. And that's where my work in pedagogy for higher education, large classes, comes in. So we're concerned to build. We have some classes, and I'll be talking about research conducted with one cohort of over 400, now 450 students. We really need to think about inclusive education in that context as well. And just flagging two other aspects, as I say, the Reach Journal of Inclusive Education in Ireland, for which Professor Richard Rose has been a long-standing supporter and the editor of that journal. And we always welcome publications relating to multiple aspects of inclusive and special education. And if you're interested in discussing any potential publications, please do contact me. You'll have my email address at the end of the presentation. The other image is of our Pedagogy for Higher Education Large Classes Network. So on to the substantive topic, I suppose, that Rajesh invited and Richard invited me to talk about today. I'm going to talk about two research projects. One is, I suppose, represented by this image here, which is of a very remote and beautiful part of the west of Ireland, where I spend quite a lot of time. And this is a lake that's very close to where we spend our time. But it's very much a reflective, small-scale piece of research that focused on student teachers' attitudes, assumptions, understanding, developing knowledge of practice in relation to inclusive education. So that's project one. Project two was conducted, I suppose, in a context very like this sort of image represents here. I don't know how familiar that would be to many of you in the room. I'd be really interested in hearing, but a very large context for teaching and learning. And the second project focuses on the work that we have done in terms of teacher education for inclusive and special education when we're working with a large cohort of student teachers, as in that second image there. So just to compare the two studies, project one was very small in scale, focusing on student teacher attitudes and understanding of and for inclusive education. There were only 25 students. I'm just checking the chat because I see something there. Okay, no, I thought it might have been a message for me. Apologies. So in this project, we were working with a cohort of only 25 students who were taking a major specialism in special and inclusive education. Now, that comes out of changes in our initial teacher education programs over the last 8 to 10 years, where we moved from there are two models, two ways of becoming a primary school teacher in Ireland. The first is a 4-year Bachelor of Education degree. And the second is a 2-year professional Masters in Education, which is a postgraduate program. So they're the two routes to becoming a primary school teacher in the Irish context. And when we extended our programs from a 3-year to a 4-year program, we had the opportunity to develop major specialisms within that program. And as a member of staff in the School of Inclusive and Special Education, I was charged with developing a specialism in inclusive and special education. So that's the sub-cohort of a larger cohort of 450 students. All students take modules in inclusive and special education, all 400 students. But there is a subset of between 25 and 30 students in each year who take additional modules in inclusive and special education. So that's the context for that study. It was a very qualitative study, as you'll see in a moment, very interpretive in nature, and founded in a critical social constructivist model. The second project, much larger in scale, we were working with a cohort of over 400 students in that study. We had a much wider focus on teacher education for inclusion than the narrower focus of project one. It's, as I said, was conducted with a core module taken by all students in the BEd cohort. At that time, there were 400 students. We are now well over 450 students in each year of our Bachelor of Education cohort. It was a multidimensional project, as you'll see. We utilized mixed methods, and I suppose in brief, we would categorize it as a participatory evaluation. So we were very much, I suppose, thinking about it being distinguished by the fact that we were working in collaboration with our students, who were the intended beneficiaries of the intervention that I'll talk about. And we were also working with other colleagues who we brought in to observe our practice and give us feedback, and they brought particular expertise. So they were different studies, and this second study was very much focused on the scholarship of teaching and learning in higher education for inclusive practice, as you'll see a little bit later on. So I'm going to begin by talking about the first project, and the title was Exploring Student-Teacher Understandings of Special Educational Needs and Disability for Inclusive Teaching and Learning. So a bit about, and I'm not going to talk through all these slides, Rajesh, if it's useful to the attendees, I'm very happy to share the slides with them. So you can follow them up with at any stage, and I've given all the references in the last two slides, the references that I've cited. But I won't talk through all the content on this, just save to say that in terms of the context for, I suppose, both studies, really, there was a renewed commitment to inclusion within the program. We had a restructured program moving from a 3 to a 4-year program, and as I said, the development of the major specialism. The context of the work with this small group of 25 student teachers gave us an opportunity to investigate our pedagogical approaches to developing the student teachers' reflective practices for inclusion. Our purposes were to explore the use of reflective practice as a pedagogical approach in the education of student teachers vis-a-vis special and inclusive education. And also we were interested in exploring any changes or developments in their understanding of special educational needs, of disability, of inclusion, and of their role as emerging teachers for inclusion. And I suppose we ran this project in the first year, the second year of our new 4-year BEd program. So we were very much in an exploratory phase, and we wanted to use the learnings from the research to inform the further development and rollout of that specialism, because the specialism involves students at that time taking 5 modules, 2 modules in their second year, they building on a core module in year 1, 2 modules in the 3rd year, and 1 module in the 4th year of their program. And we were only in year 2, so we saw this as an opportunity to, I suppose, to begin to inform and develop the program. We were asking a number of research questions, including why did the student teachers choose the specialism? There were lots of other opportunities. We've developed a range of specialisms across the program over the years. At the time, there were specialisms in physical education, there were specialisms in music and arts, there were specialisms in relation to educational disadvantage and so on. So there was a wide range of specialist options. So we were interested to know, well, why did you choose this particular specialism? What did they want to get from the specialism? And we wanted also to uncover the understandings and attitudes regarding special educational needs and disability that they brought with them to the specialism. And naturally, of course, we also wanted to explore developments as they engage with our program content. We wanted to explore changes or developments in their understandings of these key ideas relating to inclusion, disability, and special educational needs, and any changes in their views regarding their own role. I suppose this is a very kind of light touch literature review, if you like, but just really flagging the importance of initial teacher education. Can't do everything, but we can certainly uncover and counter negative attitudes and address the concerns that students might have in relation to inclusive education. We also know that student teachers benefit from supported practicum or placement experiences, particularly in special schools. And our work with our teachers indicates that is really important in terms of building their understanding of pedagogy. And we also know that there is real benefit in building as many bridges as we can between the modules that student teachers study on their programs and the work that they do with teachers in schools. And that is not as easy as it sounds. At least we don't find it as easy as it sounds. So our methodology, we had, as I said, 25 students. The data sources were post-its that the student posted activities that the students completed in class, 3 structured pieces of reflective writing that they engaged with in response to the reflective writing varied over time, but we asked them to respond to program content that we had taught them. We asked them to respond to literature, to research articles, and we asked them also to respond further to visits and time that they spent in schools. And then those posted activities and the reflective writing happened in the second year modules. And then in the first semester, the first term of the third year, these students were in schools on placement. They were in mainstream schools and they were in special schools or working in special classes or working with support teachers in mainstream schools. And they had to contribute to a blog during placement to support one another, and we engaged with them. And that also was part of our data set. So that was our focus. Sorry, I've skipped forward there, apologies. So just give you a minute to read the content on the slide there. As you can see, overall, we're talking about qualitative data relating to student teachers writing, reflective thinking about inclusive and special education. Just going to give you a minute to read that. And we engaged this large data set, small number, but we had a lot of data, as you can see, because of the range of sources that we were using there. We engaged in content analysis using both deductive and inductive coding on the data set. Quickly moving to the findings, and I'm delighted to take any questions. Why did the teachers choose the special? Okay, Rich, is it okay to continue, or did you want me to? I'm wondering.
Please go ahead, Dr. Anna.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. As I say, we'll make sure we have plenty of time for questions and discussion at the end. So why did they choose the specialism? We were delighted that one of the main reasons they identified for choosing the specialism was that they had really enjoyed their first year core module. They don't choose, I should clarify, that they didn't choose a specialism until the end of year one. But they almost with that exception said they had had such a really rich and valuable experience in the core module in year one and that they wanted to continue. They had an interest in working with children with special education needs, and for quite a number of them, they related their choice of this particular specialism to having a sibling or another family member with a disability or special educational need. Interestingly, some of them, a small number, but some of them had prior experience of meeting or working with individuals with a disability or special education needs in a voluntary group, a sports club, for example. In terms of what they hoped to gain from taking the specialism, they wanted to learn more about special educational needs. And that's really interesting when you look at the research literature. You know, students will almost invariably say, we want to learn about autism, we want to learn about cerebral palsy, we want to learn about visual impairment. And that, of course, is really, really, really important. But there are other things they need to learn as well. But almost invariably, they wanted information about categories of disability above all else. We were delighted. They wanted to know how they would teach children with special educational needs. Interestingly, some of them were quite apprehensive about their visits to special schools, and that was a surprise to us. But it was very informative in terms of our practice, because we needed to sometimes we needed to prepare them. If they were going to be working in special schools with learners with complex, severe and profound general learning disabilities, for example, we really did need to prepare some of them, not all of them, but some of them, prepare some of them for that experience. To the really interesting part for me as a teacher educator, of course, was really about the changes or developments in their understanding of special educational needs, disability and inclusion, and of their role as teachers over the course of engagement with specialists. This is over the course of 2 years. We certainly saw evidence of increased confidence as their knowledge and understanding grew, and as they had the opportunity to try things out in schools. again, building that connection between school practicum experience and higher education in the university experience. They certainly built confidence, but I think at the same time, they also became more aware of the challenges that they were going to face. They knew more, definitely, about special education needs. And I think they also understood more. There was definitely a sense of moving away from a deficit perspective, a very medicalized model of disability and special educational needs, to a broader understanding that focused more on their building their own capacity to respond to diversity in its many different ways in the schools and classrooms in which they were teaching. So they certainly began to move away from a focus on these are the students with the labels who have been identified as having special educational needs or disability, to a moving towards more of their role as a teacher of all students, and a sense that it wasn't about labeling, but responding to the diversity of students in the classrooms in front of them. They knew more about resources. For example, we would have spent a lot of time talking about, for example, the use of communication systems, whether it's PECs or technology, for example, or sign. We would have spent a lot of time on these kind of aspects. So they certainly knew more about that. They knew more about things like visual timetables, for example. And as I said, the big thing for us was they seemed to be moving from a shifting towards an individualized, deficit-focused approach to the need to plan and teach for all, and to plan and teach not just when focusing on individuals and on planning for individuals, that it wasn't moving straight towards a deficit, but that it was really important to identify learners' strengths, their interests, their preferences, and to think about the implications of those for teaching and learning. So, as I said there, initially, the early reflective writing, the post-its that they completed at the very beginning of the specialism, they wanted, what strategies do I use with this child with this particular label? Later reflective writing, and most particularly the work in year 3, when they were on placement, when they were completing the blog, they really began to locate their teaching within the context of inclusive education. So relating it to teaching for inclusion of all learners rather than focusing on individuals and deficits. So a couple of conclusions before I move on to the second project. Regarding pedagogical approaches and student teachers' reflective practices for inclusion, there was a greater appreciation of the learner. So a greater understanding of the learner, not just as an individual with learning needs, but also an individual who brought strengths, aptitudes, and so on to the teaching and learning relationship. We saw without doubt the importance of authentic teaching and learning experiences, of our teachers spending time in schools and classrooms, and us then getting them to bring that experience back, unpacking that and supporting them in thinking about the practice and what they saw, what they observed, what they tried, what worked, what didn't work in the real world of schools and classrooms, including in special schools and special classes. Without a doubt, they became more aware of the complexities of inclusive education, and that, sometimes, what's special about special education is that idea that it will always force a teacher or a student teacher to be thinking about teaching and learning in creative ways, that forcing us out of our routine to think, how are we going to make it work for this particular learner? So there will always be new challenges. There will always be complexities. And there's never going to be one program, one resource, one approach that is going to work for all learners everywhere, which of course, for those of us who are teachers in the room, is what's wonderful about teaching and learning. We were delighted to see that they became much more attuned to the fact that it wasn't just all about them as the teacher, one teacher and a group of students in a class. They could begin to see the real importance and necessity and value of collaboration, the need to work with others, to work with assistants in the schools, to need to work with other teachers, to need to work with students and with their parents and with their guardians and with their families and with the community. So they became much more aware of that. So complexity, the need for collaboration, the need for real teaching experiences, and a real growing appreciation of learners. I'm going to move swiftly, conscious of time moving on, go swiftly to the second project. But I will wrap that up, Rajesh, by about 20 past 2, before 20 past, 2 my time here. That will make any sense to you guys. And so that we have plenty of time for questions. So this was about the large teaching context in the university, in our university. And this is the actual room. The picture you're seeing there is the actual room where my colleague and I engaged in co-teaching. So we were co-teaching in this context, as in these sessions were part of that first year module I mentioned, delivered now to we delivered to 450 teachers. And we co-teach 5 sessions. So we've got 2 lecturers in the room with the students. Why do we co-teach? We co-teach because we want to try, as much as it's possible to do with a group of 450 students, to get them to look at samples of students' work and analyze that. We want to try and give them feedback, give them opportunity to support them in working in pairs. We want to take their feedback. And we also wanted to model for them co-teaching, because in the Irish school system now, with an increase in the number of learners with special educational needs in mainstream schools, we've had a huge increase in the number of support teachers in our schools. And with the increasing awareness from the UN CRPD and the right of children to be included in classrooms with their peers, children with special educational needs and disability, a big move towards co-teaching. So support teachers moving into the mainstream classroom rather than taking children out for support. So we wanted our students to learn about co-teaching, and we thought one of the useful ways of teaching them about co-teaching and the opportunities and challenges it presents was to actually co-teach them ourselves and to unpack it. So as I've said already, this was a core foundational module taught to, now we've 450 BEd 1 students. So in their very first year, and this was in their very first semester, taught in that large lecture theatre I showed you on the previous slide. We had 4 to 5 co-taught workshops within a module of about 25 lectures, and this related to threshold concepts. We were teasing out assessment, profiling and planning for pupils with special educational needs, because I don't know what it's like in your universities, but certainly in our programme, the students are taught about whole class planning. They're taught about lesson planning, short-term planning, long-term planning, writing targets for a whole class. We know that's important, but we also wanted to embed early on in their first year the idea that sometimes for some learners, we need to adopt an individualized approach. So we kind of wanted to, I suppose, open their minds to the idea that it wasn't always about planning on a whole class level, that sometimes they really need to get to know individual learners and plan for those. We conducted it over 2 years with 2 successive cohorts. We were interested. We wanted to know how this would work. We know the co-teaching works in primary schools and in post-primary schools. We weren't aware of a lot of literature in relation to it in higher education, and we wanted to learn more about it. So we wanted to create an opportunity for workshopping in that large cohort, give them tasks, give them feedback, and document our practice and model the skill of co-teaching. So I'll give you a minute to look at that. That gives you a feeling for what kind of things we were doing during those sessions. Just come out of the classroom this morning where I had to say to the teacher, please give your learners more wait time. They need more time to process. So I'm going to try and do that myself and give you another minute to have a look at this. Okay, I suppose I want to just flag two things that are important. Some of you, I'm sure, are thinking, as often happens when we talk about this work, how can you possibly do workshop activities with 450 students? It was challenging. It is challenging. It continues to be challenging. However, we feel it's really worthwhile, and we can see a significant impact because we support the students. Sometimes we use our student representatives, class representatives as well, to support us. But we support the students in completing these analysis tasks. And then we make it really clear that they're going to be asked to do similar analysis in the end of module examination. Okay, so they're really motivated, they're tuned in. What I will say to you too is we give them feedback during the sessions. But what we did over the first 2 years was, so for example, the task of writing a SMART learning target, okay, for an individual based on the analysis of the strengths and needs of the individual. We ask them to write a learning target. We teach them about learning targets. We get them to practice writing learning targets in the class. We pick samples of the learning targets and we give feedback on them, formative feedback on them in the class. But more importantly, and a big volume of work for us, was we collected, in the first couple of years, we collected all the targets that the students wrote and gave them feedback and analysed them and built a bank of collective feedback that we put on the Moodle, on the VLE environment. So that work, we tweak it every year, but basically the volume of work is done. So it's not just the feedback that they get from us during that live 50-minute session with the two of us in the room, but also the feedback that they get on the virtual learning environment. The other thing I flag is we video recorded the sessions, went back and looked at them to see could we do things better. And one of the things that was really useful for us in fine-tuning our approach to this was we asked two colleagues in the university, one with who was an expert in co-teaching, and the other was an expert in higher education teaching and learning. And we asked them to come in and observe and give us critical feedback, which we found really useful in terms of refining this over the years and making sure we're doing a better job of it. So I won't go into in detail about the co-teaching literature. All those sources are, the full references are provided on the last couple of slides. All I'd say is that it's increasingly used, certainly in the Irish context, and I know in other countries as well, very little utilised really in higher education, at least in Ireland. But I suppose the thing we wanted to really do was we are very conscious that as teacher educators, it isn't just about the content we teach, but it's also about the modeling that we engage in as we engage with students. We're modeling what we're expecting them to do. So briefly on the methodology, our reflections, samples of work. We did a survey. I won't go into the data from that. It wasn't our best survey ever, but it was there. The peer observations were the really interesting part, or one of the really interesting parts. So the findings quickly, this modeling of that approach of looking at samples, we chose a learner, had about 6 samples of the learner's work, and then various groups in the auditorium worked in pairs on the individual samples, and we took their identification of strengths and needs from that to build a profile and then tried to prioritize. In terms of the student teachers, we asked them then about the co-teaching bit. How did that impact? They could see the value of the insights and opinions of two people because we deliberately challenged one another. And in fact, we scripted it for the students because, again, coming back to what I said about the first project, we really want them to understand the complexity of inclusive education and that no one person has the one answer. So we were very keen to model that. They understood, I think, the organization and planning demands of co-teaching, because to do it well really needs to be very carefully planned. Most of them said that having 2 lecturers in the room really helped them to attend and participate. A couple of them, and this is really interesting for me as somebody who's interested in inclusive education in primary and post-primary schools, a couple of them said it was distracting. They were very much focused on the model that they usually were used to in a classroom in the university or in a lecture theatre in the university was that one lecturer stood there, probably at the podium, and maybe read from lots of slides. Didn't move around the room. We moved around the room. We had, I'm trying to think of the word. I'm having word finding difficulties. Anyway, we had mics. We were wired up to mics. We moved around the room. And some of the students said that was distracting. And that resonates with me, because we think sometimes about how that for some students, either too much movement or too much color or too much stuff on the walls can be distracting. But we also need to be conscious that maybe we needed to explain more to the students what we were doing and why we were doing it. It changed their assumptions about teaching and learning in a lecture theatre, definitely. Our peer observers, and I would, if you've ever had an opportunity to have somebody, none of us as teachers particularly keen on perhaps somebody coming in to observe us teach, but I can tell you, whether it's my work as a primary school teacher or with young adults in the secondary school or in my work in the university, I have benefited so much from having somebody come in and observe me teach and give me feedback, because teaching is so busy. Regardless of the context, it's just so much in the moment and so busy. The benefit of having somebody come in and give feedback on what's going well, all the things that are happening that you're not seeing because you're very busy, and ideas about what you might do differently or might do better is really, really valuable. They said we needed to be more explicit. If we were going to be teaching these students about co-teaching, we needed to say, this is where I'm modeling co-teaming. This is where I'm one teacher, one assister sort of model, for example. And certainly it was really supportive for us. It had a number of implications for our own practice in initial teacher education. We have moved more towards now co-teaching with colleagues in other modules. So my colleague and I will teach in curriculum and foundation disciplines. So we're teaching, for example, with the music educators, or we're teaching with the visual arts educators. We're teaching with those who are delivering psychology modules, for example, as much as we can. So that comes back to the point I made at the beginning about initial teacher education for inclusion. It can't be in a silo. It can't be just there in those modules that are labeled inclusive and special education, but it needs to permeate all the components of the program. And we're getting there slowly on that. It certainly led to our involvement in a wider peer observation of teaching project in higher education across disciplines, and the establishment of this Pedagogy for Higher Education large classes network that I'm involved in. And if any of you are teaching large classes in higher education, and by large we use a kind of an arbitrary cutoff, I suppose, of about 100 students, we'd be delighted to talk to you about potential submissions for our research network and proceedings. We're not so sure yet about the impact on student-teacher learning. The literature tells us that it's positive. We're not, the jury is still out a little bit on that. And then the last two slides are literally just some references there. I think it's just, I hope I haven't gone on too long, Rajesh, but I just want to say thank you again for the opportunity to be here with you and talk to you about our work. I look forward to talking to you, to hopefully answering some questions and maybe some further work together, whether in the context of the journal that I mentioned or in the higher education research network. And all my information is there on the screen, which, as I say, Rajesh, if it's convenient for you, very happy for the slides to be shared with anybody if they're of interest. Link to the Reach Journal and to the Pedagogy for Higher Education large classes network. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing there, Rajesh, and I'll just, this last picture there is of our lovely campus, some stained glass on our lovely campus. If you're ever in Dublin, please do come and visit us. Thank you, Rajesh.
I like the way you said Dhanyavad in Hindi.
Yes, I'm working on that. I'm working on my Hindi.
Yeah, thank you so much for a wonderful and comprehensive presentation. Members, now the session is open for question and answers. Please go ahead. I can see some chat.
Yeah, I won't attempt to pronounce anybody's names. I'm really sorry, because I would only do injustice, but thank you for your kind words.
Thank you, Anna Logan. This is Jayanti Pujari from Amity University, and excellent presentation. I'm very much interested to know, as a teacher trainer, what is your take back from this research? Like how you are using in practical field from this two research.
Okay, very good point. I think the key point that we took was that not to take any assumptions, not to make any assumptions, and to give the students more opportunities to talk about their practicum experience in the classes and to tease it out, to help them to understand more the challenges, because they see a lot of the time a challenge between the message we will give them in the university and the practice that they see in schools and classrooms. So for us, the more time we could give them to talk about that, to be honest in saying, you will leave our university and fourth year and you'll go out to schools. And I've heard teachers say this, and teachers in the schools will say, you can forget everything that you learn in the university. You're in the real world now, and this is the way it is. So I think the biggest thing we got out of it was to make them know that was going to happen, but equip them to be leaders for inclusion themselves by winning their hearts and mind, by making them realize that they could make a difference, even if there were lots of cynics around them, by building their confidence that what they were doing was the right thing to do and that they could really make a difference. And we've tried to kind of support them into, as they've begun teachers as NQTs, newly qualified teachers, to do that. So that's probably the big insight in terms of that. The co-teaching research, I suppose we're very confident about our work we're doing with the small cohorts. We're less confident that the message is getting in when we're working with big cohorts. We're bringing individuals with disabilities into our lecture theatres. We're bringing the parents of young people with disabilities into our lecture theatres. We're bringing teachers in. We're trying to build those connections, but it's harder to do it on a larger scale. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Thank you. Lovely answer. And as teacher trainer, we also have the similar feeling. We also make the student explore themselves and come out with the many queries, so that like we give them a satisfied answer, so that they build their personality as a teacher for a specialist in inclusion. We don't force them upon anything, and we just leave them in a situation and explore themselves and provide the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jayanti.
Dr. Anna, there is a message from Professor Richard. I always enjoy hearing you talk with such enthusiasm about your work and hope to see you in Dublin.
Thank you, Richard. Lovely to see that. Wishing you well.
Yeah. Please post questions in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and you can ask the question to Dr. Anna.
Rajesh, I think Rashmi has put her hand up.
Yes,
Hi,
Dr.
Anna.
Rashmi.
Thank you so much. Hi, Anna. This is Rashmi. I'm sorry I missed the first 15 minutes of, I think the first few minutes of your presentation. So if you'd already presented this, I'm sorry to have to ask you this again. But I wanted to know, what would the main differences be between the sort of the course module that all 450 students do and the course module of the students that choose the specialization in inclusive education?
Good question. Very good question. I don't think I probably didn't really answer that. So you're not, hopefully it'll be of interest to other people. Okay, we don't have a separate qualification to teach. It's not like, the American model where sometimes a student can choose to do a general education pathway or a special education pathway. We don't have that model in the Irish context. Any student who does a Bachelor of Education or that professional master's 2-year program, a 4-year degree or a 2-year postgraduate program, can be qualified to teach all learners in primary schools. And interestingly, and I'd be interested to know if it's similar in India, interestingly, that also includes, so that's learners from the age of sort of 4 or 5 to the age of 12. But they are also qualified to work in a special school, because our special schools, even though you could have learners up to the age of 18 in them, fit under our primary system, okay? So these students could be teaching in a mainstream school with learners from the ages of 4 to 12, or they could be teaching up to 18-year-olds in a special school, or they could be teaching in a special class, okay? So you asked me about the difference. So all the students have to do two modules in inclusive and special education. One is in the first year, and the second is in their 4th year. The 4th year one is very much linked also to disadvantage, educational disadvantage, and it's linked also to learners of English as an additional language. So it's a kind of broader framework. We've very little time with them. It's taught in a large plenary lecture, but we have given a lot of thought to this, and we talk about the big picture ideas that we talked about earlier: attitudes, inclusion, what does inclusion mean, the difference that a teacher can make. We give them a sprinkling of input on categories of disability and the implications arising, but we don't emphasize that. We really emphasize individual education planning and the need for that. So they all get that. Then the specialism modules, 2 in year 2, 2 in year 3, 1 in year 4, for a cohort of 25 to 30 students. We're going in much greater depth. We really focus on collaboration, working with parents, working with students, working with other professionals. We focus a lot on leadership for inclusion, giving them those kind of skills as well. We would do a lot of work in the area of autism with them, because we have a huge growth and expansion in the number of learners identified with autism. So we would talk about PECs and models and such as TEACH, for example. And we talk a lot about visual and hearing impairment and physical disability as well. So, but collaboration and leadership, and a lot of work on, whole school approaches as well.
Right. And I was wondering, with that aspect of time, you said that with that large class of teacher students, you don't get to spend a lot of time with them. From a previous research that I had also done in Australia with Professor Umesh Sharma, it was about this co-teaching model as well. But in that, they co-taught with a current school teacher. So a lecturer, a university lecturer, and then a current school teacher, co-teaching this module on inclusive education. And one of the things that came out was this aspect of time, and that the course modules were not long enough. I believe some of the teachers who were then placed in schools felt that the training was not very much adequate in terms of the reality in school or the time that they spent. So I was wondering if you probably had the chance of maybe going back to these teacher students maybe 6 months after their school placement. What did they think of the program? Was it long enough for them? What was their feedback?
Okay, very interesting. We've worked with that small cohort of 25, and we've worked very closely with them, kind of jointly researching with them in terms of their role for leadership for inclusion. So they found it very valuable. The core module, we haven't followed it up. However, I did cite a study by Hick et al. It's in the reading list there, the reference list. And that was a very large scale study carried out by our National Council for Special Education on initial teacher education for inclusion. And the students, and this was a national study, so it wasn't just our own program. Without exception, students want more on inclusive education, and they want more opportunities to be working in those kind of roles in schools as well. They say they learn so much about it, and some of their insights were really nuanced, because they say, it isn't just about what we learn in the modules that we do about inclusive education are beneficial for all our teaching. So they're not just saying this is for teaching this particular group of learners, but it's enhancing my capacity to teach all learners. So, I mean, we haven't had a chance to follow it up. And I've kind of moved more to sort of an administrative teaching and learning role within the faculty, but I'm really interested in that work. I've seen a little bit of work on that where the practicing teacher and the lecturer working together, and something I'd certainly be very interested in doing. Problem is getting teachers released to do that work.
Yeah.
It's
Thank you.
Thank you, Rashmi. Very interesting. Maybe we'll have a chance to work together on something of mutual interest.
Hi, hello, Dr. Anna. It was really wonderful attending your session because it's also very close to my, my research topic, which was about. So I did a study on existing teachers who were already in the school, and about their professional development need for inclusion. So I was really excited to attend this one, and it was absolutely wonderful. And it was actually quite interesting to see how, even across geographies, the problems and, the situation kind of remains the same. And of course, I think I will connect with you later in person, because I don't want to take up everyone's time on this, but just wanted to say that it was excellent and I really enjoyed it, and a lot of valuable things came up. Thank you so much.
That's wonderful, Divya. My colleague Fiona King and other colleagues in my School of Inclusive Education do a great deal of work in that. And actually, I don't know if it's maybe of interest, but we have a funded PhD opportunity in our university, starting in the School of Inclusive, obviously not for yourself, but a funded PhD opportunity.
Yeah,
if you know anybody who would be interested, and it's working. The call for papers the call for submissions. It's very much focused on professional learning for inclusive education.
That's great.
Yes.
That's great.
Do follow up with me.
I will. Thanks a lot. Well.
Oh, thank you very much for the what we call a cúpla focal, Gurev Mahagat. Thank you in Irish.
Requesting, we'll take a few more questions. Let's say like 1 or 2. Dr. Rashmi Rangarajan was our previous speaker, and Dr. Divya Dubey will be our forthcoming speaker.
Good evening, sir.
Yes, sir. Please go ahead, sir.
Yes, sir. Very good evening, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. I am Dr. Dhanavendra. I'm a special teacher for children with cerebral palsy. I'm sorry, between your presentation, the third slide, which is written related to your co-teaching, which is I joined. Apologies for that. Ma'am, related to special reference to that co-teaching in children or young people with cerebral palsy, can you add it? Is it any module is there? How about that higher education? It's happening in the inclusion, ma'am.
Sorry, I lost you there a little while ago. I didn't quite catch it. You were asking about, was there a module
related
to
children or young people with cerebral palsy and related to your co-teaching, ma'am?
Not really. Our co-teaching focused more on what we asked the students to do is we gave them samples of the work of it was a young person actually with general learning disability, didn't have a physical disability, but general learning disabilities, and asked them to analyze that as a language transcript and then samples of a word reading and writing sample and so on. So it was really a vehicle. Co-teaching was really a vehicle for getting them to understand the need for individual education planning. We wouldn't have focused specifically on learners with cerebral palsy. We have a wonderful young man who is part of one of our panels, who comes in and talks to that large cohort of students, and he has significant physical disabilities. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce the disability.
Sure. Thank you.
But he gives input to them as well and talks about, they're really powerful. I think when individuals with disabilities come into the university context and talk about their experiences, that is such a powerful experience and it's really powerful because we've got 400 students in the room. There's something really powerful about all that number of people being in the space together and hearing from an inspiring speaker. it sits with them, I think. But sorry, we don't address it particularly.
Sure, ma'am. Thank you so much for your kind words. And it's an excellent presentation, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, anyone else? Or otherwise, I would like to
Can I
ask.
have a question?
Yes, please go ahead, Ms. Ramalakshmi.
Yeah, hi, good evening, good afternoon, and thank you for that generous sharing of knowledge and information. I just have one question on the part where you had mentioned about collaboration, right? So that was one of your key findings that you had mentioned there. So, and I do believe, like, I come from a background of an inclusive school and training teachers for being in an inclusive school, and it's really nice to know that that is one of your key findings, because I have realized that that's one of the major success factor, when it comes to inclusion. So there are two parts to it. One is teaching the why of it, and then teaching the how of collaboration. So when you say collaboration, like what was your finding? Was it inclining towards the why or the how? What did you have in your program?
I think we need to have both, without a doubt.
Yes.
Because the why is, I think relatively easy. We can do a good sell on it. We can point out that by for example, making links with other elements of their program, how enriching it is for them. If I can go in to talk to a group of students and say, in psychology, when you're talking about scaffolding, this relates to this. So for them to be aware of the value of teachers talking to one another, of teachers talking to parents, of teachers listening students' voice. The why, I find, is a fairly easy sell. They kind of get that, and maybe that's because in schools too they're seeing more and more of teachers working together in classrooms. They're seeing assistants working closely. The how is a whole other ball game altogether.
Absolutely.
And actually I just had occasion to do a session with them on Tuesday. And it was about working with assistants. We have 20,000 what are called special needs assistants in Irish schools. I don't know if Richard is still here, but this is a very strange phenomena that developed in the Irish school context. But the challenges for a young teacher coming out of the university as an NQT, working with what is almost invariably a woman who could be 50 or 60, has been working in the school for the last 10 years, knows everybody, lives in the community, knows all the parents. The challenges of supporting them in having the confidence to work effectively with somebody like that is an ongoing challenge.
Right.
I don't have
and just being curious there to understand if there have been any structure that you have developed as part of the curriculum to impart this how of collaboration actually.
Yeah, one of the assignments that we asked them to do in the third year module on collaboration and leadership, we asked them to develop a wiki. Yeah, we do a lot of group work because they're a big court. They do lots of group work. Right? I don't know about students in India, but students in Ireland a lot of them do not like group work because sometimes there are what we call loafers in the group, students who don't do any of the work, and some people do all the work and so on. So we one of the things we found worked with them in kind of getting to realize that we don't always get to choose who we work with, is to get them to do a wiki together. They develop a wiki in Moodle. Now it's taken us about 3 years to get to the point where it actually works in some kind of a way, but to kind of really emphasize, we showed them examples of early wikis where Anna and Rajesh and Richard were in the room, were working together, but they weren't really working together because Anna did this bit, Rajesh did this bit, and Rashmi did this other bit over here. And how it didn't become a useful support for inclusion. And the topics of the wiki are always about inclusion. And then we could show them ones where the group really worked together. The same thing applies if you get students to do presentations. Unless they work together, it doesn't really work. So that has been helpful, certainly.
Thank you so much. And I'd really like to appreciate your talk on co-teaching as well, because that's also something that we have been practicing. And, like you said, it's pretty much helpful and mostly successful in the primary grades. But when it comes to middle school and high school, I would definitely like to keep myself updated on, all your findings from there. And I would like to resonate with Rashmi on, the fact that the time factor is something that comes as a barrier when it comes to co-teaching. Though there are a lot of advantages, I think initially to kind of push it and to make it visible in terms of the advantages, I think the time factor plays the villain, I should say. So if there are any developments on those lines, we would definitely like to get ourselves updated on that. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Ms. Ramlakshmi, can you please tell from where you are and what you are?
So basically, I'm from Chennai, and I have been the head of inclusion in one of the inclusive schools in Chennai, but I also am the founder of an organization that predominantly focuses on collaboration between all entities that work with children, including the school. And we have been in the process of developing a product or a service that is going to bring together all efforts that is being, put forward for the progress of children who are neurodiverse in particular. And we have also been giving this a structure and a timeline so that we are able to kind of, follow up with whatever assessments or recommendations we do as special educators and other professionals. So it requires, a considerable amount of follow-up in terms of, parents as well as adults. So it's a structured program that we have been developing, and I was particularly interested in this collaboration aspect only because of that. Thank you so much.
Okay, welcome to the group.
Thank you.
It's always wonderful, Rajesh, to hear, similar challenges being experienced all those thousands of miles apart. There's a comfort somehow in that, and there's great opportunities to learn from one another.
Well, I don't think anybody else has, but I'll take 1 or 2 minutes just to pose a question. Because since you have sent me the PowerPoint in advance and I was able to go through that, I had few things like since you have covered in the area of curriculum and training, and you have covered the practical experiences and the awareness and attitudes and the support services that we are talking about, the evaluation and reflection, policy and advocacy, and I think the continued professional development. My just one thing I just wanted to ask, like, how does this program that you have developed is going to encourage lifelong learning and inclusive teaching practice?
This is such a challenge. It really, really is. We try to instill that idea into our student teachers from the get-go that, you are not going, this is the very beginning of your journey here, and there will always be opportunities. And I think, one of the consequences of the pandemic is that there's a lot more highly accessible training available to newly qualified teachers and very experienced teachers. It's a variable quality though. And I mean, the challenge for us a lot of the time is, I don't know, maybe with being a long time in this business. I taught for 20 years. I've worked as a teacher educator for more than 20 years. I just worry sometimes when teachers say, can you give me a program or a resource that I can use with this group of learners? When we know above all else that, no one particular program or resource or whatever it is going to work for all learners. So, and that's why I think accredited university-based training is really, really, really important. I think teachers are interested, but there's lots of competing demands. economic demands here in the Irish context. We've had a reduction in the number of teachers taking master's level programs, and a lot of that is because the cost of living has increased so much. It's very expensive to live in Dublin, the cities, and less teachers are engaging in that kind of study. But I suppose more of them are engaging in the kind of activities like we're engaging in here, like the webinars, like there will be online chats, UDL chats, Universal Design for Learning chats, events on I don't like not to call it Twitter, but X or whatever it's called now. So there's a lot more happening. And I think that can only be good. I'd like to see more investment by the state in professional development for teachers in inclusive education, and students tell us they need more as well. So, but look, I suppose all my colleagues across the program will say they need to learn more about teaching PE, or they need to learn more about philosophy, or they need to learn more about educational disadvantage. So we can only just do as much as we can do, and then all of us emphasize this is only the beginning of your journey.
Thank you so much, Dr. Anna. Members, I think we have come towards the close of the 2.3 webinar series presented by Dr. Anna Logan on research in relation to initial teacher education for inclusion. On behalf of India Inclusion Research Network, on behalf of Dr. Mallikarjuna sir, Dr. Anamika Sinhaji, and on behalf of the Member Secretary of IIRN, Dr. Himanshu Das, I take this opportunity to thank Dr. Anna Logan in spite of her schedule. And I'm really sorry that I used to keep on sending you emails about the schedule and other things. I'm sorry. I just
no, it's great. It's great. I knew everything was in control, and I'm sorry. We just had a big crisis in the city. There was a lot of trouble on the streets last night for some, which is most unusual in Dublin, but it caused a lot of traffic difficulty, which was why I was so late getting to you. But no, it was great. You had everything organized, Rajesh, which is just what I needed.
Thank you so much. And information to all that next webinar, that is 2.4 series, most probably we are going to hold it on the 15th of December, because the last Friday, that is 24th of December, I think it is going to be the eve of Christmas. So many will be busy. We'll be having the pleasure of listening to Professor Gary Hornby from the University of Plymouth, United Kingdom. So till then, have a good sleep, stay healthy, take care, and thank you all. Namaskar, Dr. Anna Logan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rajesh. Take care.
Thank you, Dr. Rajesh, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.